So across the ready writing field, and in our years of experience reading and judging these essays, we really see 4 different categories of essays come to light. The first is the expert, then we have the jack of all trades, the grocery shopper, and finally the paroxysmic. Essays in the expert category tend to do a number of things. They tend to frame their argument as a meta-level framework, and then they elucidate examples across fields, what their interests are, over a specific period or issue. This oftentimes can breathe new life into some examples, and so they might talk about Hitler, which we think is pretty tired, but they would actually have a unique nuance. They would analyze Hitler through 18th century French philosophy, or they would apply a political framework that follows throughout the entire essay. And so anything that they use as an example follows this framework. They also leverage specific examples underneath these overarching frameworks. These examples serve their actual subpoints, but the frameworks are paradigms. They're paradigms for how the reader should think about the thesis statement they're getting at. So these are not going to typically just give you examples in a list format. They're going to be able to tell you how this impacts an actual worldview.
Experts tend to win contests because they avoid the formulaic structure, and they provide a cohesiveness and a perceptiveness that we don't see in other essays.
However, having the expert approach comes with its own challenges. When you apply a framework, for example, a political theory, to an entire essay, it can really be difficult to ensure that it doesn't sound like you're hitting the same point over and over and over again. You need to really ensure that each body paragraph is hitting a different nuanced subpoint of your thesis, and that it's still applying to the overarching framework you're utilizing. It also, by extension, needs airtight logic. You have to ensure that your framework makes sense with the examples you're giving, with the thesis that you're writing. And as a corollary, students who write these expert type papers focus on the framework, not typically on an extended metaphor. An extended metaphor is its own strategy. When you apply both of them, the essay seems bloated. It doesn't know what it's doing. And so you need to keep that in mind for students who might want to try incorporating a meta-level framework into their essays. More common than experts are the jacks of all trades. These are your traditional ready writers. These essays are probably going to comprise most of the previous state champions. You're more likely to see these than you are to see experts. Jacks of all trades know a lot about a lot of subjects. They tend to rely on really crafty extended metaphor strategies. They do have a good argument. They support the argument well. They get in and they get out, and they do what is traditionally considered a classical ready writing essay. The thesis is defended across a variety of fields. These fields make sense, the arguments cohere, and they typically rely heavily on unique hooks in place of a meta-level framework. They're not going to analyze their essay through a certain political philosophy all the way through, like an expert would. But it tends to pay off. A lot of students at the high school level succeed as being a jack of all trades. But if an expert walks in the room, there's a bigger challenge.
So jack of all trades, it's an easy process to set up. It's traditional writing, and then also most often liked by traditional judge. So they do tend to fare well at contests.
The challenges that accompany being a jack of all trades and utilizing this approach is, the challenges are going to be your typical ready writing challenges. You need to have strong conceptual transitions that are concept transitions, not example transitions. You need to have a really good idea behind your thesis, because otherwise your essay can become pretty formulaic quite quickly. And if you're utilizing an extended metaphor, you need to be brief but effective. These metaphors can quite easily become bloated or belabored. Third are the grocery shoppers. Grocery shoppers tend to show up in invitationals, in district, and rarely at region, sometimes. Grocery shoppers are on their way to becoming jacks of all trades. They're pretty good at giving us a list of ideas or a list of examples, but they struggle with actually applying these examples, analyzing them, showing us how they relate to the general point of the thesis or a subpoint of that thesis. They struggle to distill the important aspects of an example. They also tend to have their most perceptive ideas in their introductions and their conclusions. They have good concepts in their head, but oftentimes they're just going off of what feels right. And so their introductions or their conclusions might be under-supported in the body paragraphs, and they might be too broad or too narrow.
The only advantage of the grocery shopper is that you can provide a breadth of examples with some specificity. However, the cons...
Essay clarity tends to suffer. You oftentimes have examples that remain too nebulous or, quite frankly, contrived. Another issue is that these are unlikely to advance past district or region. We're looking for development being ready to write. Having good ideas is the name of the game. Typically, the strategy is not a good one for showing that you have what it takes to meet the name of the game. The last kinds of essays we tend to see across the board represent what I call the paroxysmic.
What is that?
Great question. Paroxysmics are people or essays that tend to be prone to outbursts. They're very passionate, but they tend to be polemical. Paroxysmics represent generally an inability to engage in discourse with leveled reasoning, with the amount of nuance that's required to indicate high-level thinking. They typically frame groups categorically. They speak in generalizations. Oftentimes, these students in these essays really exhibit a lot of passion, but it's unbridled, and oftentimes can feel like a rant or a tirade.
And as judges, we appreciate that passion and that conviction, and that really is probably the only advantage of being a
paroxysmic. At the end of the day, these students most likely are not likely to advance past district. And if they do, it unfortunately can sometimes display a lack of understanding of the prompt, of the real world around them. They tend to be reductive. And so it's really important that we encourage these students in these essays to think more deeply, think with more nuance. What about their life is actually interesting to bring to the concept, and how do we turn our passion into passion that actually persuades people about their argument? So the upshot is that there are different aspects that come to light in this contest. Judges come to the table with different backgrounds, and we tend to see certain aspects across the board. This isn't going to fit every circumstance. But as judges, we do our best to remain rooted in objective evaluations and leave our assumptions and our backgrounds at the door.
Ultimately, we're looking for clear concepts, original ideas, and perceptiveness. But again, all utilizing and leveraging the new holistic rubric.
Because I want to make sure I understand what I say. Paroxysmic.
Thank you. Because I was like, I only know this is a medical term, and he's using it in a way that I never even thought.
I don't know if I've ever actually heard that word in my life.
I'll redo that, and I will say the proximate, or.
No, you said it. I just didn't know what it
Can we
meant.
go to jack of all trades? Can we go to expert really fast before we redo? I may want to flip. Can we go back to your? So the expert tends to like. Okay, I'm just trying to think which one's going to be. Keep going. Fine, we're good. We're good. I was going to flip flop because I thought, well, an alternate is the expert, but then no, we'll keep it the way it is. I'm not changing anything. Sorry.
I'm going to redo that, and I'll make a comment on the paroxysmic, just like a little like, what the heck does that mean?
Yeah.